Hello and welcome to Dojo Talk. This is the BA martial artist coming to you. If you've been following my blog this year, you are aware we've been focusing on the different levels of perspective to understand your organization. The 6 perspectives we are focusing on this year are the organization, the customer, the process, business rules, systems, and data. All of these areas help you in understanding different aspects of your organization. We kicked off January with Perspective 1, the organization, where we learned techniques around the business model canvas, functional decomposition diagramming, and value stream mapping. In March, we moved over to Perspective 2, the customer. We discussed why a focus on the customer is important, and we also learned about customer journey mapping. In May, we started the conversation on Perspective 3, business process, where we talked about what a process is, the components of a process, and how to create a process map. Today, we are going to learn a little bit more about process with my friend and colleague, Robert Thacker. So a little bit about Robert. For nearly 20 years, Robert has managed the successful implementation of process improvement projects for many different organizations. These projects aided in the release of new products and refined existing processes, saving millions of dollars. Robert firmly believes that your processes are at the center of everything you do. If you don't understand your process, you don't understand your business. Robert has worked with customers in financial services, healthcare, government, and manufacturing, teaching them how to better understand the services they as a company provide, how to improve their customer experience, and how to make the connection to the processes that drive them. So sit back and relax and get ready for episode 3 of Dojo Talk. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 3rd episode of Dojo Talk, also known as the DT. This is the BA martial artist coming to you with my amazing friend and colleague, Robert Thacker, to discuss business process. Robert is definitely an expert in this space, so you're going to get a lot of great information and golden nuggets. So, Robert, welcome, and thank you for joining me for my 3rd episode.
Oh, thank you, Paula, for having me. It is wonderful to see you. It feels awkward, it's wonderful to see you via Zoom. Yeah, I'm so used to being able to see you at conferences and us being able to sit down and have a chat and everything. But yeah, I'll take this. It's better than nothing.
Exactly. Have a chat and eat massive donuts, right? Donuts that are bigger than our
Yeah.
heads.
Oh, yeah. The donuts the size of like car tires. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, how have you been? A lot's been going on in this world. It's definitely a different world that we live in than last year. So, how have you been?
I've been doing okay. It's interesting. This whole well, we'll say the pandemic thing first, kind of put a lot of eyes, interestingly enough, on our topic today, where people might not necessarily have been thinking a whole lot about process before.
Mm-hmm.
They woke up very quickly when it came to starting to think about process when they had to start defining resiliency and continuity plans. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Personally, I've been doing fine. As you know, Paul, I work from home for the most part anyway, so it wasn't really a big change for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with getting used to that, I think the biggest change was the fact that everybody else is home now too, and that
Right.
so that's been a little bit more of the adjustment.
Right. Definitely true. Definitely true.
How
Definitely
about you?
feeling
Been doing
the
good?
effect. Yeah, I've been doing pretty good. It's been busy. It's
Mhm.
just been different. It's been different with everybody hitting Wi-Fi now. So my
Okay.
Wi-Fi connection goes up and down and whatnot. But other than that, it's been good. It's been fine. It's been a nice time for me of just gratitude and reset. Just resetting my priorities,
Hmm.
resetting what's important, just being able to stop for a minute and think. It's been actually a good thing. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think I hear a lot of people, and they've had various concerns about being at home and having kids at home and having family at home, and I guess I'm in a fortunate situation. One, I like being at home, and two, I like my family most of the time. So the and more importantly, they like me most of the time. So that's yeah, we're fortunate that way. Going, I guess, knocking on what, 3 months now, and yeah, we're coming up on that, and yeah, we're all still here. Nobody's buried in the backyard yet, so we're all good.
Right. Good to hear. Well, we're here today to talk about a topic that I'm passionate about, you're passionate about, business
Indeed.
process. That's how we got connected, how we got to know each other over the years. And so I couldn't think of a better person to bring on this episode to talk about that. And then to have you coming back. in our episode 4 to talk about process mining and process automation, some
Oh.
other hot topics that are coming up as well. But let's just talk about process a little bit. What is your
Mhm.
definition of a process?
Well, I think that's interesting because it's when we think about process. I mean, process is so ingrained really in who we are as people, right? I mean, in reality, there's absolutely nothing that you do during your day that's not process involved. I mean, when you wake up in the morning, I mean, there's a process to that, right? You open your eyes, you move the covers. I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'm going to brush my teeth. There's your whole morning routine. You call it a morning routine, but at the end of the day, it's a process, right? But so a process, really, by its definition, is just it's a series of tasks or activities that you're going to be performing in order to achieve a very specific outcome. That's really all a process is at the end of the day. And there's various types of processes. Some are more important than others, but a process, like it's just a series of activities and tasks with the intent of performing a specific that have a particular goal in mind. Somewhere along the way that you'll probably dive down, there's other sub processes underneath of that. Processes involve other processes, but that's the definition really, of a process in its most simplistic form. When we
Mhm.
start thinking about, I guess, trying to like capture process, there's a whole lot that goes into it. And I think that even in your last episode, I liked her definition of a customer journey because it's very often, I think, as I explained to you, how I explain a process. All right, you start thinking about a process, we start thinking about the folks that are really involved in that. And I think we'll talk maybe a little bit more about that subject later on and what's involved in it.
Mhm.
But that's at its highest level, set of activities, set of tasks that perform a specific goal. That's a process. Yep.
Perfect. And I'm glad you mentioned my previous episode because one thing I did forget to mention for those who are tuning in, and this might be your very first time experiencing Dojo Talk, this year I've been focused on different levels of perspective of how to understand an organization. And so we went through understanding the organization at an enterprise level in
Hmm.
January and February. Then we went into understanding the customer experience in March and April. And now we're in our third perspective of process and how you can leverage processes to understand how an organization works. So, to go a little bit deeper than that, Robert, what is the difference between a process map and a process model? Because both of those terms are used in the industry, and I think
Yep.
sometimes they're used interchangeably, but there is
Yep.
differences to them.
Most definitely, and I agree with you. A lot of times they are used interchangeably, but when you think about a process map versus a model, there's an entirely sort of different level of detail that goes into one versus the other. And I kind of like to think of it along the lines of, well, even like a physical map, right? If you were going to take a journey and you pulled out a map, well, that map will help you to understand where you are and where you want to go, and will help you sort of understand the path that you want to take, right? But at the end of the day, it really is flat, right? It's unchanging. If the road has changed in any way, shape, or form, if there's any accidents along the way that might be, might cause a risk, or you might need to navigate around, or somewhere in this particular trip, if you thought you might need to use the restroom or you wanted to eat, a map won't tell you that, right? It's flat. So a map is literally just sort of the listing of the tasks or the activities that show you the path. This is where you are. This is where you want to be, and here's the path to get there, the things that you need to do along the way in order to achieve that end goal. And that's a map. But if anything changes, a map won't capture that. It stays flat. Just like the map that you might have in your car, that map doesn't change until somebody goes back and redraws another map and you go buy another one, right? So otherwise, it's the same map you've had since 1976, right? So it is flat. A model, on the other hand, well, a model becomes more like your GPS, as it were. It's got a whole lot more information associated with it. So it's more than just a flat map. It will show you from point A to point B, but as you're driving, a model can point out things to you that will help you to achieve your goal faster or quicker or more efficiently, or help you to avoid accidents or risks along the way. A GPS does that for you while you're driving. Hey, accident reported ahead. There's a risk. You can continue moving on this path if you want. However, you can save 3 minutes. There's a control in place. We can mitigate that risk if you simply take this particular path. Right. So a model will provide you with that type of information. A model will also tell you things like key performance indicators associated with a particular process. So, how are you performing towards that particular goal? Very much like a GPS. What's your average rate of speed? When is your estimated time of arrival? If something pops up, how often have you been driving? I know just before the pandemic, my wife and I, we were taking a trip, and it said originally when we got on the road it was going to take us 2.5 hours to get there. Well, about 15 minutes into it, says you got an hour and 45, and a few minutes later it says you now have 1 hour and 50, 2 hours, 2:10, 2:15, right? You start seeing the time go up. So we're getting this real time performance indicator of our ETA, or our duration, as we happen to drive. And that's what a model will also provide for us. It can show us in real time maybe how the process is performing and help us to get ahead or make adjustments within the process as necessary. Other things, of course, that it will tell us, a model can help us with, would be even why we perform a particular process. If we're doing it correctly, if we're modeling correctly, then a process model will tell us why we're doing it, which is basically the strategic goals. Why strategically, why do we even perform this process? Why is it even necessary? Who is responsible for this particular process? Not just from an ownership standpoint, but who performs it as well. How or what risks do I have in place as I'm, that I might need to navigate as I move through this particular process? And do those risks have mitigating controls in place associated with them as well? Are there key performance indicators? How is the process actually performing so that I can make decisions to go right or left as necessary? So a model just has a whole lot more detail in it than a map does. Map is flat. A model is more three-dimensional with regards to the things that I can see and do with how it relates to a particular process. And that's really sort of the big difference between the two. Is one is flat, static, the other is constantly changing as my business changes.
Gotcha. So you can say static versus dynamic. One is more static, stays, and the other one's more dynamic as it keeps building
Right.
and building. It goes with the flow.
That's
Perfect.
exactly right.
Perfect. So as companies focus in organizations,
Right.
and my audience here focuses on business process management, if that is an area they're focusing on, how
Mm-hmm.
do you recommend organizations or people determine what their critical processes are versus other processes?
Well, that's an important question for today, right? I mean, we think about, probably a few months ago, people started thinking within their risk models, and we start thinking about disaster recovery and continuity, and we think about the common things, the data center goes out, or there's a weather storm or something like that, things that, we're aware of. But I guarantee you now they're also thinking about things like pandemics, right? Or social disruption, that might be happening within a particular area. So, and those things also have a big impact on on an organization. So when we start thinking about what we call business critical processes, they really get defined, I guess, into three different categories. And you can ask yourself, when you're looking at a process, three questions. One, does this process provide the ability for me to provide service or my product to the customer? Basically, is it customer facing? Does the customer touch it? All right, so is this a customer facing process that allows me the ability to provide my service or product to them? The second question is, does this process help or protect my employees? Right? Because there's certain things that we do that are in place in order to protect them, to protect their well-being, to protect their safety. And then lastly, is this something that I am legally required to do? Right? There's a lot of things that we do, depending upon our industry, that are regulatory requirements. And some of them might be to protect the previous two, but in a lot of cases, it may not, it may just be the law, right? That you have to protect data security or privacy along things, that you have to report accurate financial earnings and things of that nature. So these are regulatory requirements that are in here, things that we're doing legally. If you answered yes to any of those three questions, that is a business critical process, all right? If it's customer facing, if it protects your employees and you legally have to do it, then that's how you're going to define. Anything else you're kind of doing might support those, but these are really the three things that are going to define for you whether or not it's a business critical process within your environment.
That's great. So those are just three easy questions we can ask ourselves every time we're thinking about our process inventory. And how do you, So as people determine what processes are critical, let me step back a minute.
Hmm.
How do you even determine if a process is a process or if it's really an activity of a bigger process? So it's not really a standalone process.
Hmm.
How do you approach that? Do you just start with a brain dump and say, here's all the things that we do today, here are all the processes we do today, and then we
Right.
just start and then you figure it out as you go? Or is there a little bit of a science or a golden nugget we can use to easily determine the difference between an activity and a process?
Well, and that's a great question. So when we start thinking about, the approach that we're going to take, a lot of it starts with the goal in mind. I mean, really, what's driving this to begin with, right? Because that's really going to tell you what level you need to be able to diagram to or map to or model to, or whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. So what is the actual end state and who is your audience, right? Because that in and of itself is what's going to tell you. There are certain things. I mean, at the end of the day, as I start thinking about um, individual processes and the activities that are in them, in order to perform any of those activities or tasks, technically there's a whole nother process there's a process that I'm going to go through. It's just a matter of whether or not I want to document to that level, or capture to that particular level. And some things it's easy enough for me to just say, to tell you to do, and you will intuitively know exactly what that means, and it doesn't need to be captured for you out in any specific detail. But some things become a little bit more convoluted when you say them. Right? Say, if I just simply said, you know could you make me a sandwich? Well, intuitively, you know how to make a sandwich,
Mhm.
right? And you might go and make me a sandwich. Now, whether or not I get a ham and cheese sandwich or a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or a grilled cheese sandwich, I didn't give you any of that detail, right? So, you know, depending upon, the level of detail that I want to go to, if I say make me a sandwich, that maybe then kicks in a whole other process, which has a decision tree. Well, what type of sandwich do you want? Right? Because now that, it drives out and says, all right, well, what type of ingredients am I going to need? And then I'm going to, so everything basically has a process, even the activity level. It's just a matter of what detail you need to go to. And a lot of that depends upon what your goal is and why you're documenting and modeling to begin with.
So you just went right into two of my other questions that I had with you is how do you approach creating a process map or model? And then how do you determine the right level
Yeah.
of detail to document? So I will tell you, in
Okay.
many organizations that I've worked with many people that I've worked with, that the level of detail has
Hmm.
always been the area of contention.
Right.
Because,
Yeah.
people will say you have a level 1, a level 2, a level 3, a level 4, and
Right.
then they try and distinguish what those different levels mean. A level 4 it can be more your activity level, where a level 3 is your high level process level. So there's
Hmm.
a lot of content and a lot of confusion and contention. And I'm quite sure as you've worked with clients and organizations, you probably see this all the time. So where you're in a situation, or where an organization is in a situation where they're trying to determine what level do I want to go to, is it
Right.
really specific based on the scenario? Is it the process? Or is there a way they should start as they start to build out their process inventory? And then from there, they can go deeper and deeper and deeper. What has your advice been to some of your clients?
Well, a lot of it, it kind of starts with just sort of defining, as you state, more high level functional processes, right? There are things that we need to do within an organization, and sometimes this starts with identifying, we'll call it maybe a framework of some way, in some way, shape, or form. So regardless of what type of framework you want to follow, maybe you want to use something from like the APQC folks and the way they've got it laid out by individual industry, and that kind of gives you at least sort of a high level set of processes and sub processes as it breaks things down into individual functional areas. In financial services, we've got, five or six things, high level processes, functions that we need to perform. Underneath of each one of those functions, there's three or four processes within each one. And then how do you do that? Well, that's where we start getting down into the activity and the detail level. So usually I'll start with folks with just sort of identifying the individual functional groups that need to be involved, and then identifying at a high level what are their actual process categories. And this is before we even get into maybe documenting and mapping drawing anything, right? Because you don't necessarily need to draw everything within your space to begin with, right? We want to start with identifying sort of the main level things that kind of fall into those three categories as before, right? Yeah, this is where our priorities should be, and then we can add or supplement other things to it as we go. But as we start defining that framework, and as we start looking at what those processes are, now we understand, well, within finance, I've got receivables, I've got payables, I've got, payroll, I've got, so so now when I get down into payroll, all right, well, what goes into the payroll process? What payroll processes do we have? There's onboarding, there's offboarding, there's retirement, there's all kinds of stuff that kind of fits into that particular category. And so we start breaking those things down. So usually start at a high level, at a much higher level. And as you mentioned, there's people that they might refer to them as level zeros, level ones, level twos, level three, four, whatever levels they want to go to. But that level also defines pretty much the audience for the map, right? Or for that particular flow or for that particular diagram. Yeah, I think things that are more level zero are more strategic, right, in nature. It's more of a strategic map. So here's a listing of all the strategic direction of the organization and the things that we need to be able to do in order to provide our services to our individual company. Jumping down from there maybe becomes a little bit more of a capabilities, kind of map, right? So these are the capabilities that are defined within there in order to deliver on those particular strategies or those goals. Well, if we've got those particular capabilities, what processes are going to deliver those particular capabilities, or where are those capabilities going to show up in which processes within an organization in order to be able to drive those particular, strategic goals forward. So again, a lot of it does depend on who's driving the bus, right? As to the direction you're going to go. And I think, we'll probably chat a little bit later on with where people generally start within their organization. But if you've got an executive driving it versus, say, a business analyst driving, then your directions aren't necessarily going to be going down the same path. And so that's the other thing, is just sort of understanding the end goal. As I mentioned before, there's different things the analyst will want to do, but that, quite frankly, his executive manager won't care about, right? But in order for them to gain traction and get what they want, they have to be able to show the value to what the executive wants. And defining that level of information for them is really what's going to be key.
True. And I've also found in my career that some processes, process maps or process models, depending on why you're documenting that process, might have to go quite granular. So it might start as a process model, but then you
Yep.
might also need to do a system context or a system architecture model. Then you might need to do a data model because the issue might be happening in the data. So it could
Right.
start as a business process and then just go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yep.
One thing also that I've seen a lot of people do that I think is a huge mistake, and you can tell me if you agree with me or not, process mapping procedures. So so I've had this argument for many, many years. A process leverages one-to-many procedures, or maybe none, but we should not be mapping a one-to-one of procedure to a process map. What has been your experience with that? Because that's been one of my biggest areas of training and sharing of knowledge, that you don't just start with a procedure and just create that as a process map or model.
No, because procedures and policies are basically rules. I mean, that's really what they are. I mean, these are rules, and they're not, but they're not the process. The process is what we're going to do, and then we have policies and procedures that basically tell us what the rules are of following that particular process. Within your organization, you've got a lot of different policies and procedures, right? That are within there. You've got a policy and procedure around what type of internet access you're allowed to do, right? And what you're allowed to do while you're on the internet. Now, but one of your processes might be go to the internet and do a search on some material. Well, you've got a procedure basically that just provides you with the guidelines. This is what my process is for how I'm going to be looking up a person's, say, credit information, but my policies tell me and my procedures tell me that I can't abuse that, right? That I can't start looking for personal things. I can't look up my high school friends and things of that nature to see where they are now. So, but that's what a policy and procedure bring to it. that's not how I do. That's not how I do the work. Those are just the rules or my guidelines around, around the work that's being performed. The process tells me what I need to do.
Agreed. Agreed. I just wanted to hear somebody else's perspective on it because I do think a lot of people struggle with that because they're typically you're talking to your subject matter experts. They're in the day to day, and this is
Right.
what they do. But I do not need to know every keystroke you make in order to do something. I just need to know
Mhm.
what are you doing so I can get into that process. Great. So for organizations that maybe don't focus on business process, I personally think getting a process centric focus can be a cultural shift for some organizations, just a different way of thinking and a different way of running the business and documenting and understanding the business. How have you worked with clients to help change that culture to where they understand the importance of documenting processes and the power and the value these process maps and or process models can bring to an organization?
Oh, that so, and it's interesting you mention culture, because process really is a culture thing, right? And but what's more interesting about it is, as I said at the onset, it shouldn't be so hard for us to understand process, because it's internally, it's a part of what we do every day. All of us should understand how important process is. We just don't think about it, just like we don't think about breathing, right? It's
Right.
just something it's just something we do. If we had to think about breathing every time we did it, then it would, yeah, we wouldn't. Yeah. Any rate, that's another discussion. Eric, so we start thinking about culture within an organization and getting them to understand the importance. There's a lot of knowledge that you've got people that have been in your organization for 15, 20 years, right? They have a lot of knowledge, but it's all in here, right? It's not out, it's not shared. It's great job security for them, but it's someday they're going to retire. And then what are you going to do? You're literally going to lose all of that information. When someone new starts, how much quicker could you bring them up to speed and get them on the path and being productive if you could somehow take that internal knowledge of your 15 or 20 year experienced employee and make it accessible to them so that they could literally actually see best practices. They do it because it's their everyday. They don't even think about doing it, right? It's muscle memory for them. They're just going through the motions. But this person doesn't have that. They don't have that muscle memory built up. They don't have that dexterity yet. So they need to work up to that. But I can get them there quicker if I can get the information out to them and make it, more holistic. The other thing that affects culture and probably moves the needle more than anything else is the pain we've all experienced, right? Because within my business group, I have a set of processes. There's things that I do every day, but I can't do my job effectively unless this other group does their job and hands off to me the right way. Now, when I get done with it, I pass it off to another group, and they're dependent upon me to have performed my processes in a way to help them. Now, what happens if this group over here decides that they want to change their process and they didn't tell me?
Mm,
Well, now suddenly I'm getting a whole lot of information that doesn't make any sense to me. It's not the way that something's changed. It's not the way that I'm used to getting it, or it's not even the data that I need anymore to do my job. And so because I can't do my job effectively, well, everything sort of bottlenecks with me, and I make a little bit of sense of it, and then I pass garbage off to the next person in the line, and it trickles down, right? So there's cultural change, but a lot of it's just general change management that it helps to drive within an organization. There's this open line of communication of being able to see, hey, the work that I do here doesn't just affect me, right? It I'm taking information from other people and I'm doing work with it, and then I'm passing it off to another group. Or I may find out, unbeknownst to me, that the work that I do is customer facing. I didn't even know that what I was doing was affecting the customer. So it opens up. We start thinking about the cultural shift that happens with an organization when those blinders come off, and I can actually see.
Hmm.
and take a more holistic view to it, and think of it more from an entrepreneurial kind of standpoint of this is my process, but really it's the company. If I'm driving if I want to improve and help the company, how I work within my process is going to affect everything. It's everything within a process is interconnected. Everything within our organization is interconnected. And we hear people use the term like Internet of Things, and how things are all connected, but processes really are. They're connected to everything. If you mess up a process here, it can have a trickle down effect that affects something way down the line, that unless you have that visibility of even knowing that they're related to one another, you're going to spend all of your time trying to troubleshoot a problem down here that has absolutely nothing to do with that process. Right. So it all goes, came from way upstream. And so culturally speaking, helping take those blinders down and understand how those relationships exist really does. Oh, this isn't just me. I didn't realize that they were expecting to get that information. I didn't know how they used that information. I didn't know that I affected that person. Oh, I didn't even know that I used that system. Right. So when we start thinking about process modeling, it it connects all of those dots and brings not just the business piece of it together. You mentioned it earlier too, talking about the IT piece, the data infrastructure, understanding what data I'm using. Process modeling brings all of that, to focus as well. I mean, I tell a story 100 times. I used to work once upon a time for one of the top financial institutions, no names mentioned, but and there I managed a group of IT folks. And in that particular group, they were some very smart, bright people, right? I mean, they could, if I walked in and I said, guys, hey, can you tell me what's running on this server? I would get a wonderful technical schematic of that particular box. Oh, it's got this much memory, and this is the processor that's running on it, how many processors are running on it. This is the size of the hard drive. This is how much data it processes per second. Whoa, whoa, not what I asked. If I unplug this box, who's going to call and scream at me and why? That's what I want to know, right? And that's a cultural shift. It changed sort of the way that IT thought about things, because they just thought about the hardware, just thought about the box. I'm responsible for the hardware. But if I unplug this hardware, there's business processes that don't work. There's credit cards transactions we don't process. There's millions of dollars that are lost every minute that this server is down, right? That's what I want you to understand. And that's a cultural shift. It's a change in mind and the way that you think about things. Once they got that, it no longer became an issue of or thinking about, oh, the server's down and we just got to swap out the memory, right? We have to swap this out because it's costing, because the company spends $3 million for every 10 minutes that this server is offline. We lose that much money. So it's a cultural shift to think about it that way. And process is the same way. All of that data ties in to the process and to the model.
So would you say that pretty much everything begins with a process, and from there you break it down and you find out more information?
Yep, I completely agree with that. I've said it for years. Process is the center of everything that you do. It
Hmm.
is. And we see it even in the world's acronyms now, right? People go out, they look for BPM systems, right? Business process
Process.
management tools, right? They want to implement RPA, which is robotic
Process.
process automation, right? So, that's even our acronyms tell you that process is the center of everything you do. It's unfortunate that we tend to forget that, what that P means, and we tend to kick it out when it's not convenient for us.
Right, right. And as you were going through your scenario there with IT and also just your overview of, hey, I have a process here that impacts a group over here because they're giving me information, or I have to send information somewhere else. That just opens up the understanding of where you might have risk. You might need to put controls in or service level agreements in as well to bring it all together to make sure that those processes, whatever is the output of those processes, are flowing down correctly,
Right.
or the inputs are coming in correctly, those triggers,
Right.
right? So it opens up like a whole different way of thinking, which is why I find this area so fascinating, because
Right.
it's called process mapping or process modeling, but there's so much in it and so much knowledge that you get
Right.
from it, that
Yeah.
and the clarity that you get is amazing. So what would you say, as you think over your career in working with many different clients, what have you found to be the biggest challenge for an organization desiring to put in some sort of business process management framework or infrastructure?
Biggest challenge that, hmm. So biggest challenge. Well, a lot of this, the biggest challenge can usually come from finding the right champion within your organization,
Mm,
right? 'Cause, Um, it really, it's one of those things, and it's interesting because in a lot of organizations, when you start seeing process movement within an organization, where it started, right? It rarely starts at the top and being pushed down. It normally starts with some little grassroots group down here that says, hey, we need to have a better understanding around what it is that we're doing. And so we're
right.
going to start documenting some things. And as they start documenting some things, suddenly they start connecting dots and they whoa, this is really cool. And then they start, reaching out and trying to find other information. And in the process of reaching out to find other information, they end up touching other groups and realize that they have relationships to other groups they didn't know that they had. Well, now that group is involved in the conversation. And they go, what are you doing over there? Right. But at some point within there, it stops. And usually what ends up making it stop is because something on high trickled down and took priority. Right. And as a result of that, their work comes to a halt or it stops or they end up shifting their focus and maybe they'll come back to it later, maybe they won't. And so it doesn't get to take off and actually grow across the organization because it did start low, and as opposed to starting from on high or getting or having some direction from on high in order to be able to drive that. And so internal strategic priorities take precedence, which is interesting because a lot of times when strategic priorities take precedence over something, what they're trying to fix could be fixed very easily if they just fixed the process.
Mm-hmm.
So it, yeah, it's usually the process at the end of the day that they need to be able to work on in order to be able to drive that whatever that priority was forward. But now, this is the direction we're going to go. But if you had understood this to begin with, so a lot is just finding, the challenge being one of two things. One, it's strategic priorities taking precedence and kind of forcing them to drop off process work and go focus on something else that somebody brain spasmed out in a board meeting somewhere, and now everybody runs off and tries to solve that when they didn't really even care. It was just a fart, that they had in their brain that popped out. So, and I've experienced that a whole bunch of times. Executive in a meeting says, it would be cool if we could do this, and 4 or 5 business groups run off to see who can deliver that first. And for him, it was just, I just thought it would be cool if,
Right.
yeah, I wasn't asking for that. I didn't want that. But somebody heard it and 7 groups started working on it simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And now I hope it's chewed up a whole bunch of resources and time. The other thing is process change and transformation change really needs to happen at both ends. It needs to happen from the bottom because that's where the work is being done, but it needs to have a champion at the top that's also pushing that vision across. Because at some point within your group, you will hit a wall of another group who doesn't think what you're doing is valuable. And unless you've got that voice from on high saying, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it, once you hit that wall, there's you don't have anyone to come in and help remove that barrier for you. So it needs to come from both ends. You need to have your grassroots folks working on it because they really are the workers that are doing it and performing it. But you need to have someone, a champion at a level high enough, driving that to remove obstacles from you. And that becomes their job, right? Their job is to remove those obstacles. So those are the two challenges that usually I see,
Right.
within their strategic priorities. But strategic priorities can be addressed if you have the someone at a high enough level that understands the importance of what you're doing and makes that a part of your strategic initiatives, your strategic drive.
Makes sense. So you gave us quite a bit of great keys or golden nuggets, I like to call them, in this session, right? So the first thing, get an advocate at the top and
Right.
understand that the people who actually do the work and are your subject matter experts are bought into it and bought into that work as well with your advocacy. Make sure when you're looking at your processes, you're considering the customer, the team member, and if it's regulated, if there's some laws, legal laws and federal laws and policies that you need to be following.
Hmm.
And you have to be really clear on how you're defining what the process is supposed to be used for and why it's being used and what it is to help
Right.
determine that level of detail, because not all processes are created equal. I found that. So
This is true.
so
Yeah.
depending on the process, depending on the initiative, depending on what you're trying to do with that process might determine how you approach doing the process modeling, which is why this is such an interesting topic. And one of the reasons I like
Right.
it, there's a lot of variety. There's a lot of different
That's
ways
true.
to approach, a lot of different things you can do. But I think it drives people crazy who are black and white, because it's
Yeah.
not black and white. There's a lot
Yeah.
of gray. So
Yeah. There's a lot of gray. There's no yes. Truthfully, when we look at a map, right, there's decision, little decision diamonds that pop up that are yes and no. But in BPMN, there's also not everything is an exclusive diamond, right? There's parallel paths that can be taken.
right,
Things are happening at the same time, and what those two things. No, I have to make a decision here, yes or no, and not everything is yes and no. Sometimes it's maybe, sometimes it could be, sometimes
right,
it should be.
right,
you know, Sometimes you get past it, maybe it should have been, but it's not always yes and no.
right, right. And another key that I've learned as I've been process modeling, because I've been doing this well over 10 years as well, you don't process model business rules. So if you find that you have
No,
a
no, no.
process model that's 25 decision points, probably doing too much. You might want to look at that process and figure out, are you modeling business rules that are very different, or are you actually modeling what should be in that process? And a lot of people model business rules and they don't necessarily realize that's what they're doing.
That's exactly right. You overthought it. I remember walking into one customer and they had a nice picture hanging on the wall. When I walked in, I was like, wow, that's a really cool picture of a circuit board that someone took. That's our process. I mean, that's
Oh, wow.
that's how that's how many boxes and lines there were on it. From across the room when I looked at it, I just thought somebody. It was like a picture of a motherboard from a computer. I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, nope, that's our process. I was like, yeah, we're gonna have to rethink that.
Because nobody's going to use it and everybody's going to get
Yeah,
lost in it. And so the value of the documentation is now no longer valued because nobody
right.
uses it, because they don't
Yeah,
they don't understand it. They can't follow it.
yeah. There were way too many variables, way too many. If you were looking at, yeah, I couldn't even find the start and end points on the map. And that's
Wow.
usually the first two things I look for on a diagram somebody hands me. Where does it start and where does it end? And then
Exactly.
from there, I figure out the things that are in the middle. But the
Exactly.
on this diagram, there was no. So where does it start and where does it end? You know, and I don't think the guy with me could tell me either. I think he was a good question.
That is definitely a sign right there that you've got too much going on. Definitely a sign. Well, all right. Well, Robert, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend time
Thank
with
you.
me to talk about business process. You gave us tons of great knowledge and information to talk about. I'm excited to have you come back and talk about process mining and process automation, which is an area you're getting heavily or have been heavily involved in as well. So I can't wait to have that session as well. And I hope all of you listening and watching have found this episode helpful and as informative as I have. I look forward to sharing perspective 4 coming in July. So get ready for another great month, all about business rules that we were just talking about. Right? So we're going to spend some time just on business rules. There's only so much you can talk about when it comes to business rules, though. So we'll see what we can do there, make it fun. I might even bring in some little bonuses. Who knows? It's no telling with the BA martial artist. But until next time, everyone, we're signing off. It's been great. Great, great, great. Thank you, Robert, once again for coming. And until
Thank
next
you,
time,
Paul, for having me.
everyone, PA Martial Artist says goodbye. Thanks, everyone.